again, you go back 30 years ago, the tallest buildings that were happening, or most tall buildings that were happening, tended to be office buildings. But the base reason for that is the urbanization rates and growth of cities, and this desire for people. Well, this is interesting actually, because this is a split between Asia and between East and West. Yeah, because post Second World War, especially in Europe, but also in America, there was a need for reconstruction in Europe. So countries in Europe threw up these kind of concrete talus towers that were, not necessarily great for people to live in. They weren't maintained. And it took maybe 50, 60, 70 years for Western countries to recover from the bad vibes around high-rise buildings, right? I think it has recovered now, but historically in the West, there were only two types of people who lived in high-rise buildings. It was those who had great economic freedom to make that choice, in other words, very rich, or no economic freedom to make that choice, meaning very poor. So it was either very poor social high-rise towers or mega-rich, luxurious towers. That wasn't the case in Asia. I mean, Singapore, 80% of people in Singapore live in government-built high-rise housing. I mean, you just put those words together. Government-built high-rise housing spells disaster in every frigging Western country that has attempted it. And yet in Singapore, through the Housing Development Board, and 80% of people live in high-quality, high-rise housing that's been essentially built by the government. And most of the other 20% live in private-built high-rise housing. So you've got a city there that has made this transition to high-rise living for the vast majority of people. And it's not just Singapore. It's the same in Korea and China and other cities in Asia. But what Singapore understood, was that it's not just about building the buildings, it's about putting in the infrastructure to support that. And when I'm talking about infrastructure on two levels now. I'm talking about physical infrastructure. Yeah. So I did my PhD on skybridges, about if we're going ever more vertical, we need to bring in the horizontal. Yeah. So you walk around Singapore and it's just incredible. There are like skybridges and green walls and greenery. It's just an incredible place. And the physical infrastructure between, around, and supporting the buildings and the city overall is incredible. But I'm also talking about social infrastructure. Yes, I'm talking about the communal dining spaces at the ground floor and all the rest of it. But I'm talking about financial savings schemes, investments from the government in people, all these schemes that allowed people to, move into these apartments and then eventually buy them or whatever. In other words, they did the exact opposite of kind of what was done in the West with these kind of brutalist towers. You see, now there are new populations moving into high-rise buildings, the old and the young. Yeah. So now we have so many student towers, in almost every city in the US. It's like student high-rise dorms. But also older people are moving into towers because they, when they're empty nesters, they don't want to be stuck out in the suburbs. They want to come back into the city close to this activity. But what has traditionally not happened in the West is families. That So you get married or you meet your partner, you live in a high-rise building, want to have kids, you move out to the suburbs. You raise your family, back in again. But that doesn't happen in Asia. In Asia, I think it's many families living in high-rise building and living, to be frank, a higher quality of life in some places than we are in many cities in the US.
Most modern